that opening, I will call the meeting to order. Is there anyone in the audience? You all look like you're here for a specific agenda item. Is that correct? Okay, so nothing under visitors to be heard. So the next item is the consent agenda. Oh, thank you, Carla. I'm going to add one item to the agenda at the end of the school board section to talk about whether we want to do anything in the way of holiday baskets or whatever for schools and central office. Okay, thank you. We just talked about it and I couldn't remember to add it. All right, so the next item is the consent agenda. Is there anything that needs to be pulled from the consent agenda? Okay.
I will move that we accept the consent agenda with the following items. The school board meeting minutes of November 21st, 2017, and the approval of 4 retirements. Donna Robert, CTE Assistant Director, Sandra Cahill, Phys Ed teacher at EHS, and Mary Viglotti, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, at EMS Family and Consumer Science / Health Educator, and Sally Madeira from the Fleming Learning Center and Library Media Coordinator, and also the approval of the warrants.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. I just want to make sure everyone understands those, especially people in the audience. Those are retirements at the end of this school year. And teachers need to notify the district, so that's why it's happening now. I also forgot to say at the beginning of the meeting that Al was hoping to be here tonight. He's still struggling to recover from surgery, but it also sounds like...
Oh, no, Colin, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, no, he always comes. It also sounds like he has a cold, so if I find out he's not coming next time, I'll bring a card for us to send to him. Okay, so we're ready for our presentation. Liz, take it away.
So I'm actually not giving the presentation tonight. I want to welcome and invite Tess Hastings and Jamal Hankey to give the presentation tonight. Tess and Jamal are awesome. They have been working tirelessly on this Voices for Education work for our community, and without them, the whole process would not have been nearly as great as it ended up being. So we're really excited to have them here tonight. The report that we will be speaking of is going to be delivered in January, formally formatted with testimonials and pictures and stuff. But the content is written, and the lead author is Jamal. So I just wanted to give him a little shout out because and when I sit down, we have some brochures that he also created. That's a summary of everything you're going to hear tonight. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Tess to start us off with the presentation.
Okay.
Good.
It's all right.
So we wanted to get started with the purposes of the conversations and the goals that we wanted to have achieved by the end of them. So it started with build an understanding, trust, and relationship between the community and the school district. Help create an environment that leads to more equitable outcomes for all students. Identify key themes that will inform the school board and the superintendent in creating a vision for the school district. Bring new voices to the table. and similarly, activate community members to be participants in the new district. So these are pretty loaded goals, and public engagement isn't always easy. So we're going to break it down into how we did it. So we started with a 4 words campaign, which talked to over 300 community members and collected over 900 words leading up to the conversations. The 4 words were values that community members had about education, and that acted as a foundation for the first few sessions. And then during the month of October, over 50 participants, including students, teachers, parents, community members, and school leaders, participated in 5 small conversations over 4 weeks. And we talked about what our schools are like now and how we want them to be. The discussion was centered around developing a vision, which would hopefully be our North Star in everything that the school district will do. And we wanted to focus on how it can become the best it can be. The diverse array of participants helped open each other's eyes because a lot of people came in with experiences experiences in school that other members hadn't heard before, and it showed people that having the strongest school district we can have is really important and will impact everyone. Then following the conversations, a group of VFE members compiled the data, identified the key themes, and picked out what would be the most important to share with you tonight. And we have a lot of data, so we wanted to give you some overview of the sessions so you can place what happened where. So session 1, like I mentioned, we built on the 4 words. We determined our most prominent values around education. In session 2, we envisioned the future. We talked about purpose of education, instruction, and facilities, and what we all wanted that to look like with our new school district. Session 3, we talked about what success looks like for all students. We talked about the costs and the benefits of when students don't succeed. And we looked at data and correlating results and outcomes from students and why certain scenarios had different outcomes than others. Our last session was session 4, and we talked about action steps, how we can move forward in the future to make our ideas reality. And before we go into process evaluation, I was wondering if I can invite either participant or facilitator to share one of their biggest takeaways from the experience.
So I shared with the board the full report, but we yesterday received the evaluation from Everyday Democracy. And just to remind people, this is a 3-year project that's being funded by the Nellie Mae Education Foundation in partnership with Everyday Democracy and the Great Schools Partnership. And this evaluation came in timely, so I shared it with you. We're not going to get into the details, but you have all of that in your report. And for our viewing audience, that will be online on the board, tonight's board meeting if you go to ewsd.org. But just quickly, what we learned was up there, that we had 100% good or excellent ratings, and it suggests that this dialogue process worked really well as an effective engagement approach in this community. The feedback from the facilitators revealed that they had a highly positive experience facilitating the dialogues, and that their experience showed the value of people from diverse sectors engaging with each other through conversations on issues that affect them and their community. 58% of the survey respondents the survey that went out to the facilitators and the participants said that there was diverse representation in this dialogue. 42% said it wasn't sufficiently diverse, and these at-risk, these groups were identified as being missing. At-risk students, disabled children or people, community members that have been marginalized, people from various religious beliefs, more teachers, and more diversity in socioeconomic status. We continue to work on strategies to engage these groups that we're missing, and understanding that they're missing from the table is a start. The Voices for Education group is committed to figuring out some strategies that can get those people to the table moving forward.
I would just say, or get the table to those
Or
people,
get the table to those
understanding
people.
that
That's right, that's
among the strategies.
good point, Kim, thank you. Yeah, because we do know that we can't expect people to come to us, and we're working on strategies that doesn't require them to do that. Thanks, Kim. And now we're going to pass it over to Jamal to get into really the data and what came out of all of these conversations. So Jamal.
Yeah, I'm just going to speak to, as Liz just said, some of the data we collected. These are themes that came up across multiple conversations and we think would be continued to be heard if we asked 100 more people. One of the biggest things that came out across the board out of all the conversations was the importance of student voice. Participants thought there should be more avenues through which student voice could be heard, and we had to open those up so that people could get their voice through. Related to this was the opportunity for more flexible and real-world opportunities for students to learn in. And at the same time, we have to recognize that every student is an individual and they learn differently. We also found that people really cared about having high-quality teachers. But not only this, but having an environment where these teachers could grow and learn, as well as systems in place to reward them to ensure that they're growing and learning. And there was also a big want for an environment that was safe and inclusive to all, that would kind of encapsulate all of this more positive attitude and thinking. So this was from the second session. The first session, these were some shared values across the community, and there was a statement for each main idea. The first one was about having high quality learning opportunities and a culture of excellence within our district. The statement reads, Essex Westford School District should be a district in which a culture of excellence is sewn into the fabric of everything that takes place in our schools. The system is adaptable so that teachers, administrators, and students are encouraged to grow and improve. Essex Westford School District should be a district where flexible learning opportunities, including those out in the community, are available so that students can reach their own goals. Recognizing that achievement is specific to every individual, assessment should be individualized as well. EWSD should be a district in which we have truly passionate teachers who create a positive, inviting environment in which students have effective relationships with their teachers. Essex Westford School District curriculum should incorporate relevant life skills that will help students now, but also in the future. Students will progress through the system ready to take on real-world challenges and leave with the skills that they need for the rest of their lives. EWSD should be a district in which every student's voice matters, is heard, and will be respected. Our schools will be filled with empathy and compassion, and everyone will feel physically, mentally, and emotionally safe, allowing for students to be happy and enjoy their learning. And then moving on to the second conversation that participants engaged in. We asked them to imagine the future relative to 3 different core areas. These were facilities, instructions, and the purpose of education. And from facilities, this was just like a theme, an overarching statement that came out, and it was to improve the aesthetics of our schools to make them more comfortable, environmentally friendly, and open to the outdoors, with interconnectedness between all the schools as well as the community. In relation to instruction, but there should be better communication between students and teachers so that students are trusted and allowed to participate in making decisions about how and what they learn. Hands-on, relevant, active learning opportunities should be provided that are also transferable to the real world. And the purpose of education should be that students leave school with all the skills and abilities that they need to take on the world, no matter what post-secondary path they take, whether that be going on to college, the military, heading right into the workforce. The third session, this session was a little bit different from the others because We only collected data at the end. There wasn't very much along the way. It was more of an experience for the participants to have, because we were talking about equity and what that looks like in our district. And for the benefits of having a school system in which every student has the opportunity to succeed, these are some listed up there: unity and inclusiveness within the community, increased individual self-esteem, and just happier people in general. And this improvement would be cyclical. It would just build on itself because success breeds success. The community would be prosperous, people will stay, and more people want to come here as well. And then also people overall would just be more engaged in the civic life of the community, which is really important. Some actions that came out, and this was from the 4th session. This was the session that kind of wrapped it all up and said, okay, what can we do now? And participants wanted to highlight CTE opportunities. They wanted to improve student assessment and reporting, provide more opportunities to learn real life skills, create structured opportunities to increase student voice, continue and increase district-wide celebrations, identify structures to connect school and community resources, increase civic engagement, learning opportunities, and also to invest in and reward good teachers.
Okay, so that was a lot to take in.
Wait, we have one more before you do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Okay. So we had a celebration for all the participants and facilitators last week to celebrate what they did, the work they did. And at the end of this, we gave them all an opportunity to prioritize these action steps. And the top 4 are these ones up here. So after coming up with things within their smaller groups, as a collective whole, this is what they thought was important.
Okay, so now that was a lot to take in. And if I could invite you all to pause for a minute of reflection, and a real minute, all 60 seconds, to think about what stood out most to you in this presentation. It doesn't have to just be on the summarizing slide. It can be anything in it. And then I'm going to ask you to turn and talk to the person next to you and share out if you could. So, take your time.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so if I could invite a group to please share what they talked about. Or you could share something that surprised you. Yes, thank you.
Between the 3 of us, what surprised me was the diversity piece. And sometimes I don't realize that people really need to go where they are and locate them, find them. Diane had a piece that was a little different, and Martha did too, so mine was the diversity.
Yeah, that's a big topic in public engagement. Thank you.
So what was yours?
Oh, mine is, after reading the paper since being at your event on Thursday? I forget what day it was, Tuesday, okay.
It's a week ago.
Good, okay.
Just another Tuesday.
Another Tuesday. I'm still not home yet. But I saw that the true appreciation for some of the real-life courses that we actually have after reading about them in the last 2 weeks. I'm wondering if the student body or parents actually appreciate the real-life courses that we actually have, even though I'm seeing that there's real-life courses there. And so that lends itself to CTE opportunities, which of course is real life, or at least as far as school real life is. And so that does get you into the outside school real life a lot faster than the inside school life, all of it being real. But, so that was my take on it, is that I think we need to look at what we really have and make sure that people are aware of it.
yeah, and maybe there's not enough acknowledgement about what we already offer.
And mine was investing in and rewarding good teachers. And as someone who has had merit conversations off and on for years, merit pay conversations, it started me thinking about, are there other ways to reward good teaching that aren't monetary? And also, how do we create a system where we help average teachers become great, or we help them understand that they're not in the right profession? And it's an important thing for school systems to do, and it's not easy.
Yeah, that definitely does impact the whole school. And hopefully the teacher evaluation, which was one of the actions, will help out with the second part of what you said. Any other groups?
I appreciated the cross-reaching of the community. I had quite a diverse participation there, from the police chief and on downwards. I think that a lot of folks chose to participate, and I think it was a good cross-section. And I also like to see the goal that you had, or priorities to involve more community events, volunteerism, where my neighbor remarked on how it was hard to find volunteers for some of the basic services that we're come to expect, and now we're seeing a declination. And I think that's a good start to close that gap.
And I was encouraged to see discussion and recognition about not only the opportunities within the school walls and within the campuses of the different schools, but also between the schools as we come together as one district. And also just reminded about the importance and the opportunities between the school and the community, whether it's businesses or civic groups. It's just sometimes, I think we can become very narrow in our focus, and sort of think of it as a real, true community effort, I think was a great and valuable part of the discussion.
Student voice coming up so often, so frequently, I think was very good. I mean, it's very good to hear. I think it's also something very good to keep on our minds as we move forward, which we've already sort of started to do. But I think, even just hearing from people who are here attending the meeting tonight, the understanding that having your voice heard makes such an impactful difference to an individual is key. I had one question, and I'm not putting anyone on the spot at all, but getting from the 4 words campaign, where by far the biggest word that was in there was the word fun. I'm not seeing fun really represented here at the end. And I mean, I don't mean that as a critique or a criticism, but I'm just kind of wondering where it is that the thing that seemed like it was the most important, gut reaction to people in the community for education was that we have to make sure that education is fun, because, to be honest, that's how kids best learn. If they're not enjoying themselves, then what's the point?
No, that's definitely a good point.
Do you want to speak to that, Jamal?
Yeah. So I feel like, personally, fun isn't something that can be forced, but by taking these steps, we're kind of creating a space and environment where fun just comes naturally. So it's a result of all these changes and all these things going on. Because, if you ask a kid, what do you want school to be, they're going to say fun. But you also have to realize that to make something fun, there's other steps that have to be taken first.
Fun came up in a lot of different formats. It came up in keeping good teachers around. It came up in creativity in the classroom, in interconnectedness with the other schools, and how we can be a classroom out on the town. And also it came up with how we can be creative and adapt with our new technology and our new world and personalize a learning experience for a student. So it definitely took on a lot of forms in the conversations, even if the word fun wasn't explicitly used.
And just to talk a little bit more about about the process, so the words were gathered over the summer, and then with those words, the next step was to dive into them more and to have the groups that participated in the process pick their own top words that came to the surface. And in that process, with the participants of the community conversations, the word didn't rise to the surface with the participants, with the 58 participants that were there. And we used those words as a building block to start the conversation off. But what you see reflected in here is what came out of the conversations, not what came out of the summer words. So as we dove more deeply into what those words mean and what things we wanted to prioritize, that's why fun fell off when the summer Wordle that came out, you saw on the, if you go to the Facebook page, at Wordle, fun is in the middle of it. It's not that we lost sight of that education needs to be fun, it's that in the process, the people who were in those small conversations didn't prioritize fun as the word that they wanted to really pick apart and come up with a statement and a definition for.
Do you think there was a reason why that was the case?
Yeah, Matt, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah,
And your name, sorry for the
yeah,
camera.
my name's Matt Byrne, my son Glenn goes to school. And, announcing their success to the entire world, rather than keeping sort of old traditions in place and just following those traditions because they're the same thing that people have been doing for 30 years. So I think it's really important to, take the feedback that's here and put it into concrete steps that let students do the fantastic things that they're doing, the fun that they're having in school, and then be able to communicate that to the rest of the world.
One of the bigger challenges is how do we get kids to feel engaged and invested in their work, and hopefully as a result of that, it will lead to more fun.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that we throw an ice cream party every Friday to high school.
That's not a bad idea, though.
Yeah.
It's also not everybody's idea of fun.
I did just want to make sure
Yeah.
that, because it was something that was so prevalent when we were starting this, that of the actions that we can take up here, if I'm picking one, continue and increase district-wide celebrations.
Yeah.
Right. That sounds fun. The rest of them sound awesome for engagement. They sound great for, how we would want to present our schools to the public, but I'm just not sure that I'm getting from there. I'm getting there. I'm not sure how the public necessarily is going to look at. This is where you started out. These are the opportunities that came up. Where's the thing that was most important to us?
That was a totally valid concern. I definitely see how you got to that question. Keely.
So something that I was wondering about coming out of this is what people mean by real life skills, because that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. I feel like often it's focused on trends, that there's some things that you'll always hear about, like some version of financial literacy, but that a lot of things that are really important to the marketplace right now aren't going to be in 5 years. So to me, a lot of the skills that we do teach in an academic classroom are real life skills, and maybe the problem is that we're not making the connection. Because like my husband runs a software company, and there is nothing that his company wastes more time and money on than that their employees cannot write an email that is grammatically correct, polite, and conveys the information that it's supposed to convey. And rather than creating a new class about writing emails when you work in a software company, we could think about the way that you do learn that in your English class, and you learn, whatever the class is, if you're having a hard time and you learn to struggle through it, that's going to help you when you have to change careers or what you do in your career completely changes. So I think we are teaching a lot of real life skills, and maybe we need to work on packaging them so that people can see the value of what they're learning in the classroom.
Yeah, I agree. That's what, when it doesn't say it up there right now, but like the relevant life skills, like there needs to be the connection between what we're doing is relevant to what we're gonna have to do out in the real world. And then also, What was I gonna say? No, I was gonna say something to that. I was part of compiling like all the data, and specifically some of the things that came up were like, say a 10-year-old wants to go to the movies. Will they know how to buy a movie ticket on their own? Like probably not, but they should be able to. And then also fixing a flat tire. Like a lot of kids are gonna be driving, they'd be on the roads, but they're probably not gonna know how to fix a flat if they get one. So just like those kinds of things that
And
will come
balancing
up.
checkbook
Yeah.
came up,
Yeah.
which people don't do anymore.
I say that.
Yeah, just things that will come up like in your everyday life that you might not know how to do. But not necessarily creating a whole new class for it, but yeah.
I wanted to say that I had a chance and the opportunity to be a facilitator, and actually had in my group the youngest participant. So we had a 4th grader. And I just want to point out, when we're talking about student voice, talking about relevancy, it's K-12. And so we don't reserve this engagement for a certain age. It is a way of being and a culture for the entire school and a continuum that is driving towards that relevancy, that real life experience, that individual assessment, that individual learning. So, that's the other part. There is a dominance because of the incredible quality voices that we have at the high school level that participated in the talk, but there is a real reality that we heard from kids that are in the high school level who really struggled, particularly through the middle school ages, not having choice, not having the opportunity to explore their interests, and needing to sort of wait it out until they got to the diversity of offerings at the high school.
Yeah.
We lose students. Those are students that waited it out, but we absolutely lose learners because they don't find the relevance and the connection to them as a learner.
Yeah.
They don't want to go to our school, they want to go to their school.
That's a good way to explain the complexity of the problem, and that's relevant life skills is a really good point. Thank you.
I have a question, because this grant that we've been using, this 3-year grant,
Yeah,
as was stated, we've got 1 year left.
that's correct.
And so we do great things. We do things like this, and it's all wonderful and it's great. But is there conversation of where to go from here?
Marla.
Where this group of people,
What
for
do
the
you
same,
ask?
Nice segue.
That is a great segue. Before we go there, did you have something else on?
I was just gonna, I think it's to your point, Marla, among the things that stuck out that I'm especially excited about is that this big ask of 8 hours of time, and for those who are facilitating, we trained for 8 hours and then we'd spend an extra hour every week on it. It was really incredibly big return on investment as far as I'm concerned, and it created what I was hopeful of with the grant was that it's not just what we can do for those 3 years, why we have a grant. I think we've created an expectation and a bit of a culture shift, and we're having conversations about student representation on board, and student voice is the biggest thing we heard out of this. And what's the next thing we can do? Because I can't imagine any of us considering big thoughts or changes or questions or challenges without asking students their opinion now, because we've heard loud and clear how valuable those voices were in these conversations. So whether it's sitting at this table or throughout our district, as Beth had the opportunity to hear, and you guys have, and we've got, you helped with the the town manager process, we've created avenues for conversations that are becoming, I hope, the expectation. And so we have the opportunity to come to that with our capacity that we're building while we have the technical expertise.
Right.
Because I hope a lot of the people that participated in those conversations would want to be facilitators next October, because we really, I just thought that was too big an ask and we wouldn't get enough out of people able to do that, and we did, and it was amazing. So I saw that.
Yeah, I think your question is really an excellent question. I'm a very concrete thinker. I think the vision stuff is great, and I think it's really important to inform organizations as to which direction we're going in. But I always like to think of what are the concrete steps that you can take. You know, either immediately, in the next year, or the next 5 years, that are going to fulfill the vision. And I mean, there are a lot of people who are really good vision takers. I like to think vision, and then I like to think concrete actions. And I can think of a few things, and this is probably not the form to do it, but I can think of a few things that you can do right away that would fulfill some of the vision that you have out there, fulfill the values that you want to pursue after going through this process. And so I think the answer is yes. There are definitely ideas that came from the groups that you can implement right away, and then there's other targets that are, 2 or 3 years out, and then there's other long-term things. I think the critical question is, now that we have a vision statement, what can we do to fulfill the vision? What are the concrete steps that we can do to make this a reality?
So you're getting to the heart of how I feel, is from being on boards all these years, board members come and go.
Yep.
You'll notice there's a lot of older members here. Younger people do not have the time, they're raising young families. So my concern is, as a board, we have a vision.
Yours are still videoing over there.
Well, no, but they're not.
I know.
They're young. No, we have a vision. And there's a vision, but the reality is when we sit here as a board, we're going to be talking weeks. There's going to be months of budget. And I mean, we've got nuts and bolts that we're trying to do. And it's how do we as a board manage to be able to be thoughtful so that grant process and what Voices for Education has done, to me, is an offshoot of the board, because I don't think the board can be out there doing that.
Right, and I think
So-
that's a great point, Marla, and one of the things that we've started speaking of in the steering committee, so I think we mentioned, or I don't know if we did here tonight, that there's a steering committee that formed last year after the planning team met in October. That steering committee, Kevin Macy is there, thank you for being here, Kim and I, Brian and Beth, we all serve on that steering committee. That is looking towards how do we maximize the fact that we have these fabulous technical assistants in our community right now. Sue McCormick is our Everyday Democracy technical assistant and advisor, and Reed Dyer from Great School Partnerships, and they have been so wonderful and helpful in forming and in planning what this grant, how we were going to make this grant happen, and how we were going to get fulfill those purpose statements that we put out in the beginning. So one of the conversations we started already is, can we use the third year of that grant to train some people to do what Sue and Reed do? And we actually put into our budget, Ben Dickey and I wrote the third year budget document, including some mentorship and including using Sue and Reed and their expertise to help inform our group how we can move forward beyond the grant money. And it's a conversation that has already started, and the funding doesn't end until January of 2019. So we are working on that sustainability piece.
Good.
Yeah.
Time for next
And so here we find ourselves at our next steps. And before I do that, while I was thanking Reed and Sue, I had a couple other people I just wanted to thank who are here tonight. Matt Byrne and Kevin Macy both were participants, and Kevin's on the steering committee. Dylan Giambattista is our state representative and also participated in all 4 of them, so thank you for that. And Sue Hale, a fantastic participant and community member, so again, thank you for your time on that. And then on the board, we have Pat, who serves on the steering committee for the Voices group, and we had Kim and Brian, who are both also on the steering committee and both facilitated the conversations. And Beth has been extremely, and Cobb, our superintendent, has been extremely involved too. So thank you for everybody to bring this together to make this work. And for next steps, so Beth has, the date has not been figured out as far as I know yet, but in January, the EWSD leadership team is going to meet, and Beth is, it says invited students on here, and that is because she's inviting all the students who are facilitators or participants in the community conversations. It's not an open invitation for students to participate. but is going to work with that leadership team to relay the themes and help craft that vision. In April, we're going to share that vision with the community at the annual meeting, and the final version of the vision will be presented in June when the board comes to agreement on that. So this, again, just to remind us that this Voices group was really set up to help inform the board and the administration as they decide what the vision is, and as I always say, as they pick that North Star that's going to lead us.
And our work is also including exploration of our values and our belief statements and all things that will be directing our work and focusing it as we go forward.
And the other takeaway that we all have had when we talked about this is that has come up even tonight, is that our district is doing a lot of really good things, and a lot of the things on this list are in fact being delivered, as Keely was saying and others have commented on. And one thing we have struck on is that, and as far as CTE, especially, there are jewels in our district that the community doesn't know about. And how can we do a better job of informing the community what already exists and what we're already doing to address what the community wants to see happening in our schools? And that's sort of what Keely was speaking to, and it's what this group has identified as a real action item that we can move forward with, really letting the community know what kind of jewels we have, because we certainly are very lucky about what we have to offer in our community. And that's where we are. Any other questions?
No, I think you've left somebody out to thank. Yourself.
Oh.
And I just thank everybody that joined, and Liz, you've been fantastic.
Thanks,
So-
Marla. Thank you.
So, and thank you.
Thank you.
Tess and Jamal. Thank you guys so much for being here. And one of the outcomes, one of the things, student voice, student representation on the board, we've already talked about last month. We're starting to move forward with some of these ideas even right now. And Tess and Jamal are staying involved not only in the Voices work, but also in figuring out the best way to bring student representation to the board. So we can't thank you enough. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Well, that was certainly inspiring, and we'll have a lot of things to think about as we make decisions over the next couple of months, particularly about the budget. Even though we won't have our formal vision completed, I think this is a good roadmap to what that vision is likely going to look like. So,
I forgot to
Great.
ask a practical question. The presentation tonight is a little different than what's in our packet. Will this be on the site, EWSD site, so that Kim doesn't have to go word for word in the minutes?
Yes.
She can refer to it? Okay.
And also, I forgot to hand these out, but these are the summaries of this, and I'll give that to you, Kim, and send you the PDF to be included in the board package.
okay. So, let's move forward with school board business, and our first thing is a transportation update. So, Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, I just kind of quickly put together an update that, so what we've been focusing on since our last meeting dealing with transportation, so I missed the very last meeting, but the meeting before that, we've been concentrating actually on special ed transportation, currently looking at trying to size that up. We feel there's a significant opportunity for some greater efficiencies there, depending upon how we take on the operational control for special education. This is what we're self-performing right now, so this is primarily in Essex Junction, but if we take on more self-performance in the other districts, I think there's considerable savings and efficiencies we can find. We've been working on developing a first draft of potential start and stop times. I think, I imagine this to be work that the board will want to engage its community with, but I think it's important to start with something. It's kind of hard to sometimes engage around a blank piece of paper. And I think it's appropriate that the educators do take a first pass at it so that we know that it's rooted in that science and practice that we want to make sure decisions are rooted in. So that will be coming forward. We're exploring initial pricing of vehicle leasing, maintenance contracts, and driver training services. This is that hybrid approach that we talked about. Can we find those competencies from someone else and then just take on the operational control of those elements? So we're researching that with an existing vendor, primarily to see if we're asking the right questions that ultimately would go into a bid package that would be more formal and competitive. Researching options for the Westford K-8 transportation contract that does expire June 30th. So working with confirming what some of the preferences and requirements are at the Agency of Education with regards to multiple vendors for single service. And then working to frame the question of designated ridership for the board to consider at their next regularly scheduled meeting. So this would be the meeting coming up, having a discussion about where does the board feel about pursuing a designated ridership kind of arrangement?
Can you remind us what that means?
Is that the question?
My question was, the first draft of potential start and stop times. I could do with a reminder of what the current start and stop times for all 9 schools are.
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
can't really keep track of the ones that I have.
We'll definitely provide, we'll provide you a metric, a kind of a matrix of like, what do we currently have? What's that look like normally on also part-time or half-days? And then what would be the proposed?
And also knowing the current sort of wiggle time. For instance, Summit Street provides supervised playground availability from 7:30, though the school day starts at 8. I know the high school classes end at X time, but then the school day ends at a later time.
Yeah.
Information like that would help us more understand what people are really experiencing right now
Sure.
than just the start and stop time.
It's probably going to, sorry,
What?
I think it's probably going to impact, the Essex Junction Recs and Parks handle, before and after school. And in the town, I believe it is the Y. So I'm sure there's got to be some
We know,
Communication.
yeah, we are, there's gonna be a lot of impacts. I mean, it's one of the reasons why schools start and stop times change very, very frequently, because there are tremendous challenges to change. So I think what we wanna try to do is try to build something that makes the most sense to, the primary role this board and this organization does, and that's in the education of the student, and then move that out and understand how we need to make compromises to at least a basic structure that we know works for what we're trying to do. Otherwise, we could end up sort of the old designing the racehorse and ending up with the camel kind of situation.
That's a good one. Brendan?
I just needed to be reminded of what designated ridership means.
So right now, we consider every student to be a potential rider. So we develop all our routes, and all routes are run assuming that we will have ridership in all those buses. We know as we do that we don't have 100% ridership. So that's why we often don't have to create the transportation network to transport 100% of our students. We know that there's a certain amount that just won't, but we don't know who those are. So there are times currently that we're running full 72 passenger buses on routes and having no riders at all on them. And that's not efficient, it's not effective for us. So this would be a way, there's some school districts that have done this. Not too sure how much it has already visited Vermont, but it is something that is a practice currently. It is an initial indication by a parent or a family that would say, yes, we anticipate being riders, and that could change. Somebody could say no at first, and then they could say, our situation's changed. And we would have probably initially designed routes that would have full coverage, and then we would be able to, through eliminations, shorten and truncate those routes to get greater efficiencies.
I think it sounds like a great idea from an operational perspective.
perspective, but from an equity perspective, I would like to know how we're gonna involve sort of the guidance social worker people at the schools, because the people who are most likely to fail to opt in are the people who might have the greatest need of transportation.
Yep.
For instance, families with trauma, new American families,
Right.
impoverished families, families that never read the
Right.
handouts that come
Makes me
home.
think that the action would require opt-out rather
Right.
than to opt in,
Okay.
to give us that safety, but it's a great thought just to bring up.
That's what I envisioned, though, that people who are transporting their kids would tell us that. Kim?
And well, this wasn't my question, but just to ensure that when we're asking, should we decide to go that route, that people can opt in or out for either end of the day? They may know they are never taking the morning bus, but they are maybe taking it. So I would just imagine that version of logistics. The other question I have, Brian, I think I heard you mention the AOE having some opinion on multiple contracts with respect to the Westford situation, and I'm not sure that I understood what you were talking about.
Yeah, we're researching it right now. It comes to us primarily through some experience that the superintendent, Beth Cobb, had in her former district. There was some of the early legislation that was requiring SUs and SGUs particularly to consolidate contracts. I forget which act that was. It was the one that had the special ed consolidation and other contracts.
I don't remember. Yeah,
Do you remember it?
But it was the transportation, as I recall, it was that transportation would be run at the SU level. I don't remember it said through a single contract.
Right. That would be, yeah, and our interest is not to have a permanent situation. Our interest would be really to just try to have contracts, all the contracts try to line up,
Expire.
because right now they're on different time periods of expiration and use. So that's the update for transportation.
Other questions? So I find myself being a bit anxious about the amount of communication that's going to need to take place. So, as I've probably said too many times already, I think we need to start as soon as possible. But we're not quite ready yet.
In other words, hurry up, Brian.
Well, we've gotten a good amount of traction off of the slideshow that's been posted.
Oh, good.
And, there's been some discussion. I mean, people, for what I've received in the community, living in the community, is people understand that it's a bigger thing and it's a next year thing. So I think that they're aware through our school board meetings and through the agenda topics that are discussed that it's not being forgotten. And some of the people that were most highly attuned to the issue when I first came in continue to be that way.
Yeah.
So they're being served by regular conversations with me, or emails or other ways.
Good. Andre?
With the ridership, and you touched upon it earlier, and I should have brought it up earlier, but have anyone taken a poll on the ridership, in particular the 9 through 12 population, with respect to if there's any incentives that we could explore to decrease POVs coming to school, private vehicles? Because if we're looking at global approach and everyone's talking about diminishing pollution, et cetera, that may be something to touch upon to see if there's any incentives to discourage the number of cars coming, because I think we're continue to be at saturation point as far as facilitating the use of all the cars.
Is parking on school grounds free at the high school?
No. $85, I think.
And
it's weighted
toward seniority, so seniors have first eligibility to it, then juniors and sophomores.
It would be interesting, although I don't know how you do it, but to know how many students who drive participate in after-school activities and/or go to a job.
The other factor as well is when you have the different schedules for the high school population, That's a factor also that diminishes potentially the ridership. If you have a late start, bus is not gonna run late or an early out. That's
We
also
don't
a
drive on
factor.
early dismissal.
Yep. Okay. Anything else on transportation? All right, let's move on to budget guidance.
Yeah, so with the budget, what we have is, on a process update, we have been driving, as the educational leadership team, since really summertime. We've been driving the budget process to be first and foremost district-wide priorities. Secondly, instructional outcomes, and this is really where we start to get into some of the equity issues. So again, we're not looking for equal, we're not looking so that everyone has the same instruments taught, everyone has the same extracurricular, everyone has but we're looking for outcomes. What are those outcomes that we want? And they may be different paths that get there, but we've been looking at that, then looking at building needs, and then looking at the taxpayer impact. So we're working on the vision and the value work, and that work already is paying some dividends in helping refine where we might be going. Certainly more for our future years, but even informing this year. We've got the negotiations down, and that is probably the most significant thing of having our certified staff, though about 50% of our population is the support staff, and we're continuing to work on those negotiations. But I think we have some refinement of where those are going, so that is a huge piece. That is 78% of your budget in those personnel. So you're nearly done when we start to settle down what we're gonna do with negotiations, because then we start to work into our class size, our staff ratios, our enrollment projections. In the special ed service plan, I also want to go back on a broad sense. This board dealt with and received the DMG report on supports for struggling students. That has been a really galvanizing report at the educational leadership team level, of really taking a look at quality first instruction being the way to move an entire system forward. So you'll see and hear some of that, how it's really starting to inspire and kind of gather some attention at the leadership team side of things, and will be in the budget. Transportation obviously is one of the district-wide priorities. We're working on things right now. We've got the staff ratio starting to work on those. Those will be key elements. Enrollment projections, working on, and again, that is a ball that for the longest time was carried by one individual, and then it was picked up by another great individual, and now it's sort of just being tossed around across the entire state, trying to figure out how to do enrollment projections. So I'm becoming an expert at that. And then in the building needs, and this is really where, that the budgeting process and even the budget review process has spent a lot of time on the individual buildings, and we're actually trying to draw this back out to a higher elevation of that. But we'll be capturing the capital plan, the functional areas, enterprise operations, and even the teacher leader structure. We have different structures across the organization and how we support PLPs, professional learning communities, how we support different grade level expectations. And then from now until really January 5th or January 10th, we'll continue almost on a weekly basis receiving one of our high impact numbers from the state. Some of them good, some of them bad.
Who has pupils is probably next, right?
Yeah, and then what we'll have is in the budget work sessions, this is going back to the summertime, early fall, when we discussed, we have January, and we have the 2 regularly scheduled meetings on the 2nd and the 16th, and then February, regularly scheduled meetings on the 6th and the 20th. We've added 3 additional exclusively budget-related sessions, but we're imagining we'll also use each one of the meetings as well. So it's going to be a pretty tough slog in nearly going, 6 straight weeks. We have the 9th off. So
Every other Tuesday, we're
everyone
locked
can
in.
go to the movies on the 9th. So. And that's the way we're lining up. I mean, a lot of this is I know I have complete confidence that we're gonna be able to accomplish the budget as we always have. The interest is not to do that. The interest is to accomplish the budget at a different approach and to make sure that we're not talking about the $239,000 difference between the budgets, but we're talking about what the overall investment of $75 million means to our students and to our community. And if we can change that narrative around, I think, and a lot of districts have begun to do that, that we can follow in their footsteps, I think we'd be really well served. You know that it's going to be an incredibly difficult budget year.
Yes.
The Essex, this board talked about
Right.
Governor Scott's letter.
Yep.
The information came out last week that it doesn't look like it's 8 cents. It looks like it's 9 cents now.
9.5, I think.
Yeah, so that's climbing, and we know that there's already a 2-cent draw on it because of the easing of the tax incentive goes from 10 cents to 8 cents. So, before doing anything, we're looking at 11.5, 12 cents on the tax rate if we remain level funded on our educational, per pupil educational spending. So it's going to be difficult.
Yes. So what do you need from us?
Well, Beth and I had a long conversation about that and whether, we've had some traditional guidance in the past. At least some of the districts have had some of that traditional guidance. Last year, I reviewed what the board did, and it was in the transition year. I think the key here is really to understand if there's a mental model at the board level of reducing level funding or a restriction to the growth factor that the governor talks about, which is now projected at 2.3%, no greater than 2.3. So those are sort of the three options. Do we look to reduce, to eliminate tax impact? Do we level fund and accept the tax impact that has? Or do we grow no greater than the growth index that the governor has stated he would support but not prefer?
If you don't have a declining population, if you have a declining population, he wants you to level fund, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you want some feedback on those
Yeah, so it wouldn't be an
options?
action item, but it would be a feedback item to inform administration.
Okay, thoughts, Marla?
I never like discussing coming in and saying, we're gonna do percentage of cuts, or we're gonna meet this. I like to know what is in the student's best interest. So if that means being level funded to provide the services that the students enjoy, I'd rather go that route and then give us a list in case we have to do cuts. I like lists of priorities that all the principals and Beth and you agree on. I think it makes it a lot easier to come in it with what's in the best interest of the students. Not in the best interests of the staff, but the best interests of the student. So.
Keely?
I agree that starting from the number is not really the perspective that seems to me most aligned with thinking about student outcomes. I could definitely see trying aggressively to cut as much as possible.
Possible in areas that the RED study identified as potential areas for reduced costs. And if there's areas where we didn't get as much success last time around, refocus on that. Like if by having to keep the 2 parallel payroll systems, we spent more on payroll, like think about, what are we doing in systems to be lean the next time around. And then make a list of anything that is a new expenditure so that we are very thoughtful as a group about any increases.
I mean, we don't want to send out our expenditure increases, or probably we don't even want things that are just inflation. But if there are going to be program changes, or, you know, we're trying to be more equitable, therefore we need a half-time something teacher at some school. That's the kind of thing I think we want to see. And I think we would want the administration to prioritize those.
And I just asked if we
ads.
could see it, because it's nice to be able to explain,
Right.
we didn't cut costs across the board, and here's why, and here's what we're getting out of it. And really to understand that as a board member, it's helpful to have those discussions anytime something isn't just costing the same.
Right. Kim?
I think in that similar vein, to the extent it can be linked to identified areas for improvement around student outcomes, particularly since, you know, the single number that's reported has been SBEX, and I know that we've had some reporting from Amy on things they've identified, and perhaps that means coaches or otherwise, so that the conversations and what you bring to us is around how the investment that we're making is anticipated to either improve equity or student outcomes, and so that it's framed in that way for us.
Do you?
Patrick and then Diane.
I'm assuming you were not, but I guess I'm not sure if I've ever actually officially heard the answer. We are not in a declining enrollment district, are we? Are we level, or I mean, where are we?
Declining, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we may have some offsets that are occurring, but we certainly know that there's a greater declining enrollment situation that's occurring in Westford than maybe in Essex Town, but, generally, the state is where, there just isn't enough migration in.
Right.
Even
Yeah.
the winning towns are not getting significant numbers into their schools right now.
So the big chunk of declining enrollment was at the elementary level a few years ago. It's got to have worked into the high school.
Yeah.
Is that still happening at the high school level, or is that
Leveled
leveling
off last year.
Okay.
And, I mean, again, I think that there's some people that feel that we have leveled off and now it's our time to come back up, but again, the birth rates aren't showing that
Birth rates
we're
aren't
seeing
there.
that kind of growth again in our student population. People are feeling that we may level out somewhere in the low 83,000 from a high of about 130, 120
120.
as a state.
Well, I was referring more to just the specificity of if you're in one of these districts, keep a level. Where are we in one of those districts or not?
Yeah, I think we'll be
Well,
marginal
we
consent.
get our, and you can, I don't know if this was done with equalized pupils in mind or actual pupils in mind, but we'll be getting our equalized pupil count. Usually I think they come out December 15th. So that will give us some sense of
It's a
at
huge part
least
of our funding.
that, it's a huge part of our funding, so that'll
thanks.
give us some sense of that. Diane, Marla, and then Brenda.
One of the things we haven't discussed in depth is the CIP. So, and I know that every school has one. So can there be notations as to what expenditures are either rising or staying the status quo, given that we're going to have each improvement plan going on for not just equity, but actually if there is any improvement plan pieces,
Mhm.
so we're aware of those things being addressed.
Good. Marla.
It's probably too soon as a new board, but is there any conversation, like for instance, if numbers are up in one school versus another school, is there conversation of asking some parents to be willing to move kids to balance things out? Because if one school's got declining, And I'll use Fleming as an example. They had some horrible numbers in the classrooms, and we fixed it by adding a teacher, and they still had some high numbers in the classes. But is there anything coming up like that that's going to be controversial to us, or are we doing any movement yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a bias to, I mean, this organization that we're working in right now is working really hard to metabolize all the change that's going on and occurring. And we haven't even begun to address the change that's in our future with regards to student voice and our curriculum and trying to, all that move. So there is a bias right now to try to minimize, undue change or change for the purposes of doing it. That's a bias because we're living it every day, and we're seeing that we don't want to win the battle and lose the war kind of aspect to how our culture is and where we are with our staff and our students. So, I don't think that anybody's looking at next year to make it the year of major transformation and redistricting or reassigning schools. Plus, I think that there's some promises out there. I mean, people are expecting the consolidated district to cost $500,000 less than it does, a couple of years ago, right? Because it was $700,000 of savings, and the first year was about a $300,000 reduction with the superintendent and the business manager. So I mean, I think there's an expectation that this whole unified union consolidated merger kind of thing was to deliver on some economic relief.
Of course, we were supposed to get some revenue from transportation next year that we're not going to get because we didn't spend it.
Yeah, and we didn't expect $285,000 to be removed from our educational funding because of a.
That's a good point.
So I mean, there are things that we didn't expect, but I think there is a promise of the merger to our students and to our taxpayers that which was the virtuous cycle of how it all got approved, right? That it really made sense for the education of our kids, and it made sense also for our taxpayers.
So I would agree with Brian that I think that there's still opportunities to be had in finding savings through the consolidation of our districts. And I think we need to really push through all of those to the end and see where we get, because I think that's where we'll probably find the easiest, quote unquote, easiest savings. But I also think we need to start thinking as a district about a long-term staffing plan. I was somewhat alarmed today, and maybe this is just news to me, but that the governor is considering mandating student-to-staff ratios as a way to solve the tax hike problem. It's I think it's going to be on Vermont Edition tomorrow. So, if we're going to end up in that territory, it might serve us well to start doing some proactive planning around staffing long-term, and what are the ratios that we can afford, and what that might look like for us in the future. It might just be important for us to kind of get a head start on some of that thinking, if this is the kind of conversation that we're going to have in the coming year from Montpelier.
My guess is that we're not going to be as affected by that conversation as districts that have 40 kids in their high school or 20 kids in their elementary school.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, and I think that one thing I just want to make sure that we don't sort of get lulled into is thinking that even though the change or the rate of declining students is slower for us, it's not going to stop unless there's a dramatic change in our population and demographics in Vermont. So I think that we just need to be aware of that.
We need to be looking at that. Have you had a chance yet? No. So it's you and then Andre.
I was just going to circle back to Marla's question around voluntary redistricting, because I absolutely appreciate the interest in stability and minimizing disruption. I would hope, though, if it were to come to our attention that we were sort of out of balance in ratios, building to building within the same grade levels, that would be a conversation that we would be brought in to understand from the standpoint of voluntary, because I know that was a tremendous help to Chittenden East after their unification to allow them. They ended up not having to cut staff in one building and have classes that were too big in another, and families chose to do that voluntarily.
Yep.
So I think that there would be lessons to be learned from exploring those things if they look like they can be helpful.
Sure.
I guess my question is maybe getting into the weeds a bit much, but when there's allocation of funding based on anticipated participation, be it in any facets, and it actually ends up in an overfunded situation because the participation is less, what's the mechanism for the surplus funding? Does that get carried forward? Does it get put into the wish pot that we can have money to do this? I guess, if you look at, say, building a budget for extracurricular activities and you're expecting the turnout to be X and it turns into Y, less participation, but yet you built your budget based on a higher number, what's in place for the surplus funding?
Well, first of all, you usually have to have a coach or
No, I understand that, but
teacher, so there probably isn't surplus funding. But Brian, I guess there really are two options. If you project that toward the end of the year, that you're not going to spend all your budget, you do have the option of bringing forward proposals, usually for one-time spending. Or you leave it there, it becomes your fund balance, and it rolls into not the next year's budget, but the following year budget.
that's also something that may be explored to see if we need to change how we're approaching things with, if there's a surplus of funds that are actually unexpended. And if you're building your budget on this occurring, but this didn't occur.
Well, that always gets looked at,
So I
yeah.
think, we work on an appropriation basis.
Right.
Internally, we line up everything so it has a line and a budget block, but, there is a certain sum of money that we want to make sure is sort of across the board on a per pupil expenditure
Sure.
rate, so that we know that, that equality gives us some indication that there's equity that's happening, that there's resources in the various school buildings. So we want to be careful of that if it's not expended in one thing, that we make sure that it may move to another pupil expenditure within that school. And ultimately, I'd like to move to a basis where we're doing almost more perpetual budgeting and assessing of whether there's, there is that at the end of the year, look, it looks like we might have this kind of fund balance, or they're one-time investments. Those are costs sometimes being incurred on the 1st of June, with the last day of school being the 16th or something.
Right.
I mean, it would be much better to be doing that on the 3rd
September
of
1st.
January, or each quarter, taking a look at it and being able to assess, because there are times where our budgeting process is flawed in the fact that we're talking about it now for a budget that we won't even begin to expend until July 1st, and you just don't. Nobody has that ability to see.
No, and I understand and appreciate it. I'm just more driving at, with the declining enrollment,
Yeah.
it stands to reason there's gonna be declining participation in some of
So
the
we need
programs
to
or
be careful.
offerings.
Yeah.
And if we're continuing to fund them at the same level built on previous participation.
Right.
In enrollment, but the enrollments are going down, so it stands to reason that
Some of those
participation is
costs will
gonna
go-
slide off as well.
Right. But
My question is, Brian, audits, the districts, like the Junction, the town,
the
Westford,
legacy.
the legacy boards, we have to have done this, by December 31st, or is it in January?
That's coming up later, than you've done it.
Oh, it is,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
So we'll be talking about that, and will we discuss if there's any known numbers of any of the districts having a fund balance,
Sure.
being able to turn over?
Yeah, absolutely. When we get into, into the taxpayer impact, one of the significant items that we have to offset the tax demand is the available fund balances. So we'll be looking at those from the audited financial statements of FY17. Will be going into this FY19 budget. And you may recall that we talked a few months ago about potentially reserving some of that available fund balance with the intent of it assisting us in absorbing the $285,000 that the state will next year short our educational payment. Because honestly, we have that savings, but next year in FY19, our health insurance doesn't go down, it goes up 10%.
Yeah.
So, there won't be $285,000 of savings in next year's budget, but there will be a shorting of our educational funding.
Okay, I'd like to wrap this up. One last question.
I was just going to suggest that we consider our budget in the context of per pupil spending. In general, the 75 million is a pretty big number, or whatever that is going to become. And when we present it on our ballot, it's presented as a percent increase or decrease around a per pupil spending amount. And so to the extent our language as we look at these things is reflecting that, particularly if we're in a stable student environment or even growing or otherwise, I think it's the more meaningful number.
Well, it's certainly the number that drives tax rates, I think. In all these years, it still hasn't been an adjustment that the media has made, or to some extent taxpayers have made, but education spending per equalized pupil. So it's not even your whole budget per pupil. It's after you take out all those revenues. That's the number that, if we're concerned about tax rates, that's the number that drives them.
I think it's an opportunity to frame our conversations that way, right from the beginning to the extent we can.
Yep. Good point, Kim. All right, let's move on to task team updates. Do you have anything else on communications? Okay, you've done your thing. All right. Student representation on the board. Kim, I think you were going to talk about it.
Our subcommittee met just before this meeting. The students have been actively involved in reaching out to their counterparts in other districts, or those who may have served here many years ago through connections they made and being on the Voices for Education conversations. So students are doing some legwork. Martha, Liz, and I spoke about what pieces each of us might take moving forward. There's a really great resource from the VSBA that Martha's looked at more in depth than I had, but I had skimmed it, and the three of us looked at it a bit together. Pulled from it some resource people that were at the end of that report that each of us have said we will reach out to a few of those folks. And we've come up with sort of a stable of questions that we want to try and ask each of the folks that we talk to. Some of them are superintendents, some are board members on other boards, and the students have, again, reached out to student counterparts. So we're going to take that sort of stock of questions, try and have those conversations. We'll get together just again before our next board meeting and try and give you guys some general idea of what information we've been able to glean, see what other questions you might have from that, so that when we come back in January, we can bring you something a little more comprehensive for consideration, looking at other models and what various districts are doing, and how, if we were going to move in this direction, what has worked well and what challenges exist.
And just to say that we'll be meeting with the student group on Thursday afternoon to bring our groups together and make sure.
Evening.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions? Okay. Policy?
Policy has not met yet.
Okay.
Okay. In answer to the question that I was tasked to track down about the Village Weekly new calendar. I sent it out an email to Darby. And she replied back that she had only been looking in one spot, not two spots, for our event information, which was kind of eye-opening. So, so now she'll be looking in two different spots. I have sent off the email that, in response to Keely and Beth, and Martha, I believe, so that you guys are aware of, you know, should there be a calendar change, or do we need to have two robust calendars to maintain our activity schedule? So,
Our meeting did make this week's.
hey, you know, I asked. All I can say is I asked, okay? So we'll see. So that's that.
Okay. And have you figured out a time for the policy group to meet, or is that still under discussion? Diane? Have you figured out a time when the policy group can meet, or is that still?
I haven't broached the topic with Beth. I kind of figured she was gonna get to me as to when she was available.
Yeah, after she moves into her house, okay.
But we do have our scheduled times that were available in Beth's, on her calendar as to when it is, not knowing what Al's going,
Right.
but Keely and I have
Okay,
expressed when we're available.
okay, good.
Question, do we have any policies that we know are crucial that we start working on?
Beth has a list of things that, based on the handbook and.
There's some of the handbook, and there's also the next, you have all the mandated policies,
Right.
and then there's the recommended
Recommended,
policies. So that would be a natural progression, plus the ones that are emerging out of administration. We're also trying to push a series of procedures that we need, downgrading some former policies, but trying to get a number of things out as procedures.
Okay, all right, local board and statewide updates, audit timeline.
Yeah, so on an audit timeline, there has been, I tried to go back and find some of it, but there has been this frequency of using by December 31st, that everything would be wrapped up.
I think that's what the red study report says.
Yes.
Maybe even articles.
We didn't, I checked with Paul O'Brien, he and I spent some time looking at this. We confirmed that the members that have been elected or continue to serve on the legacy boards, there is no expiration of their term on December 31st whatsoever. So they were elected to 1, 2, or 3-year terms. Having a December 31st delivery of the audit would have been different than in the past for at least the CCSU organization. Most of those were delivered in January, but it's presumable we could have rushed it to make them happen. The fact is, right now, is we did field work and we completed the 5 audits out of the central office in November, that those draft financial statements are all expected from the 5 districts, which is 7 legal entities. So that's, it's auditing 7 entities of $9 million and up, plus that requires us, we have to do 5 single audits, 5 federal single audits as well, as part of this prior to Christmas. And we anticipate the final drafts issued to the legacy board in late January. And part of the additional, I originally had mid-January, but in speaking with the auditors, we have to take and end a number of organizations that have 100+ year lives and have those terminate at a certain moment in time and then populate the balance sheet of our new EWSD. And though a number of mergers have gone through this before, none of them have taken separate legal entities that have been outside of the SU before and tried to merge them necessarily into it. So I'm anticipating that we will have the legacy boards needing to have a meeting in January, mid to late January. And I'm not, from at least my query up to this point in time, I'm not concerned that that runs afoul of anything that we've seen happen in our organizational structure. Even if it was in the articles, it's left up to partly this board and the legacy board to control themselves.
I am trying to think back to the ballots and the terms of those
We
who
confirmed
were
them all.
reappointed.
Yeah,
Okay, so we looked at
confirmed
that
them
and there
all
wasn't
today.
like an endpoint.
There wasn't an endpoint, though there would be some, I mean, we'll finish this much more before, the second Tuesday in April. Yeah, exactly. So we had, that was our concern, is that terms were, for some reason, would be terminated on the 31st. They aren't. They were regular terms that people ran for.
I do think we had one person who missed the deadline on the petition, so was appointed, or maybe did a write-in. I'll have to think back
Yeah.
at that, which would only mean that that would be
Until the next
important
standing
if
election.
the person needed to be reappointed by the essentially defunct board to
Yeah.
a position, obviously. Yeah, right. Well,
Yeah, the
we would
biggest
still have
worry
a
was,
quorum,
yeah, and the
but-
largest worry that we had was Westford, because your terms end on town meeting day, opposed to the other
Yeah.
districts that had the second Tuesday in April. So I think we're good. This is the timeline, and this is key information. We'll be able to use, before final drafts, we'll have, third or fourth drafts by that point in time, and be able to estimate the fund balances that, Marla, you were talking about, so that we could estimate those going into the budgeting process.
And are there any other state or local updates? It sounds like Brendan knows something I don't know yet about
Vermont Vision tomorrow.
It was actually just a news report from VPR. Bob Kinzel reported it about an hour ago.
I, by virtue of my responsibilities on the VSBA board, and then I was able to, I will be attending the Governor's Summit on Education. It then went out to everybody, so I don't know, Martha, if you've gotten a call back on
I'm waitlisted.
waitlist. So initially when I signed up, I was waitlisted as well, and pretty promptly I got an email back the next day, and I tried to sign up like 3 hours after the original email went out, and I was initially waitlisted. So I don't know how quickly they'll be moving people off the wait list, but I was encouraged that I did get off the wait list right away. And I don't think I didn't see my email as a VSBA board member. I saw it at the same time that I saw the one that went out to the full group, but I did hop on pretty quickly. So
No, I did. I think I responded, maybe not the next day.
yeah,
I got it late one day.
well, and by the time you said to me, I had just come off the wait list. And that first day I got back to Nicole and I said, well, I signed up, but I'm on the wait list, so I don't know what will happen with it. So I have a VSBA meeting next Wednesday. I'll be curious to see who was on the original invite list outside of school boards, because I think one of the things I've been hopeful might happen is that it includes those outside of education that are impacted by some of the cost drivers, to include social services, and I think somebody in my pension investment committee had, or other Beamers had, I'm hoping somebody from the treasurer's office is there, because some of the cost containment ideas may make sense until viewed in the context of the cost for early retirement to the pension system. So these are all quite interconnected, and I'm hopeful that they've been thoughtful in their guest list, or however they've chosen to put out the call, to have it be a comprehensive conversation, not just about how public school boards can solve the problem.
Well, when I wrote back, I asked if they were trying to get a cross-section of people, or were they just taking first come, first serve? I haven't gotten a response. I should write to that person again, email the person. Did you say did you try to go?
I thought about it, but given Kim's experience, I was
Yeah.
going to ask, hey, is anybody going? But you've answered that question, so
Yeah.
I'm hoping you get on.
I would say a wait list is not a bad idea, just because I don't really know I will say they turned it around quickly, so now it may be that there's in fact such a backlog that the space can't accommodate
So
people.
then the question is, will they look at a different space, or are they just gonna?
It's very
right.
interesting, I don't
Yeah.
know that answer.
Yeah, okay. Anything else under state and local updates? All right, agenda items for the 19th.
Holiday baskets.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Marla.
You have the holiday cards, which,
Yeah,
Sorry, it's like they came this way.
and the other question is, we always did in Essex Junction, the Prudential Committee. Brian mentioned that Aaron on his board took care of, taking care of baskets for the schools and departments. And I know Martha had mentioned that there was one time of the year where she would take little goodies over to their staff. It was a smaller
Used to
school,
make
so they could do
breakfast.
that. I just wanted to make sure it would be okay with the board if we expend some money for holiday baskets to go along with the cards we're signing. Brian has said we have the money in the funds for it.
In our school board line, Kim.
What we had done in Essex Town was coordinate with the PTO for the, I think they do a lunch during the holidays, a teacher appreciation lunch in each of the buildings. And so, we would usually do the flowers or plant or whatever it was that was appropriate at the time. So I don't really know. We would want to minimally be mindful of what's already happening in the buildings if we're delivering a basket. Do you mean like a fruit basket or something?
We
or-
always tried to deliver not the last week when all the goodies are coming into the
Okay.
schools. We do it sooner
Okay.
because,
No, in the junction, the PTO does do teacher appreciation,
Yeah.
but our baskets typically went to like the office staff and administrators, so they were getting the goodie baskets in addition to, the teachers, which the PTO did separately.
Got it.
The holiday staff appreciation luncheon for the schools in Essex Town is scheduled for Thursday, December 7th.
December 7th.
And that's the one coordinated through the PTO with volunteer spot.
Yeah, Westford has never done any of this at the holidays. And in teacher appreciation, we used to write handwritten notes to every person who worked in the school system. But, yeah, I know. I said that to Marla. I was like, I don't think
I
so.
printed off all the staff
Oh, gosh.
for all the departments, all the schools, and there is just no way we can individually.
It's hundreds of people.
There's no way. I'll resign as clerk before we can do it.
Can
So,
I just understand then, can you explain, since we did it differently, what the baskets mean and where it goes and what
Well, it
it?
can mean different things. It's meant in the past, I called and spoke with Maplehurst today, because that's where Ben did it for the Prudential Committee. And it's customized baskets, so Ben, you look on their website, it's not just their fruit basket. There was popcorn in the basket, there were yogurts, there were granola bars. It was a mixture of things, so it could be what we determine.
For and why?
Huh?
Who is it for and why?
It goes to the schools and departments. We have a separate maintenance department that is separate from the high school. You have a technology group that is over at ADL, separate by themselves. So, and I don't know if there's other departments. I need to talk to Brian about that, but all I'm looking for is permission that we do something as a board.
So you're looking more, the individual, more to at a department level for each working group.
For working groups, and then separately, there's 10 schools.
Okay, but it is,
And for instance, the high school might get 3 baskets, CTE might get 2, you know, it's gonna depend on how many staff are in each school is what Ben went by.
So that it would not be possible to serve all staff with baskets.
No, this is
Okay.
one
basket for all.
presentation.
For all, each department at each school, the maintenance would get this basket. Okay. And the baskets are always sufficient for all the different departments, no matter whether
Yeah.
they're 10 or 100?
We can go different sizes,
Okay.
different amounts. And the other thing is, if anybody else has suggestions, I mean, I can work with Kim and Martha and see what, if they have other suggestions. I think it's important that we make an effort to do this because I think we're a new district and I don't wanna miss the meaning behind it of us having a personal interest in staff. We're so disconnected from them. I think it's a personal piece that we should do. I think there's still a lot of, there's some rumors going around, there's some concern in the schools, things about budget is going around. I've had a couple people mention things. They're so afraid of cuts within the schools. It's already making people nervous. So, and you know how rumors go. So I hope that this year that we definitely should do something for the staff to say that we appreciate you.
If we do, I guess I would advocate to make sure it's a global approach to every entity in the district rather than this one gets this and plus this or whatnot. I'd like to see.
No,
I think
it's
should be-
always done
it's based on
globally.
size, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It just, I know there was, it wasn't, we would do the floral arrangement, basically I would pick up something nice or a plant that was gonna have some longevity to it, but it had some flowers or something, for each of the 3 buildings, central office and the bus barn, and usually a bowl of, I don't know, like some candy or something that was there, or in the spring I would do, like watermelon cut up or something, but it was in conjunction with what was happening around teacher appreciation at the same time. So I know that was something that the PTO appreciated because then they were not in charge of the flowers or something, but it was coordinated with something else and people knew that they were having lunch that day, so they were in the presence of it. I'm just a little bit worried that the buildings are big, there's a lot of people in them, and will the impact be that people understand that it's even there and know it's for the intent that everybody should feel appreciated?
Hopefully
And
the
that's,
principals make that clear. I think that's your principals that are the leaders of the schools. Hopefully they make that clear when it's personally taken to them and presented.
I mean, they have in the past. So, I mean, the track record that we've seen at the high school and at the prudential committee is that they have in the past, they've arrived, they've made.
people know,
Yeah.
that, like, they know where to see them. I'm just thinking in the high school, I didn't even know.
It's the
'Cause,
same kind of thing, like,
there's
I'm
like
not,
a teacher
I'm not sure,
room
like.
in the other places.
I mean, for me, it's the same kind of thing of trying to understand what the practice is of a luncheon and where that takes place in the schools and what time it takes place and how that works into the schedule and how everyone can take. So, but I'm imagining it's worked well and people, so it's sort of the same element.
So, I think we shouldn't spend hours
Yeah.
on this, frankly. I think the point is to do something nice to say that we care.
I
Kim?
just want to say that what Kim describes,
Sounds to me more like what would sound good to me, like doing something in conjunction with thanking the teachers and staff at the buildings who, like, are really the focus of getting the education to the students, and making things work out there on the front lines, like just making it a bigger celebration that includes more people by
The
thanking everyone at that is great.
The challenge, Kim, is that goes on in Essex Town. It doesn't happen in Westford. I don't think it happens in Essex Junction.
Well, there are building like things celebrating teachers and staff in Essex
Not
Junction.
this time of year.
It's
I'm
big.
being asked to provide something for teachers for
Okay,
something,
well,
so maybe it's something else. I guess just to me, like, I don't want to be doing things because I hear that there's some rumors and people are going to quit their jobs. If that's how they feel about this district, like, go ahead and quit your job.
But
Like, we need to.
let's not
No,
have
I
teachers
don't
start
wanna
volunteering
decide
to quit their
based
jobs about that. I think
on
we're
rumors.
going like way too deeply into this.
Yes.
There are gift baskets that are sent out to the schools. The schools get them, they put them in the office. People go and grab an orange, a flower, whatever.
A yogurt
Like,
It
this
sounds
is
like
just.
we're trying to also get baskets to like every,
department.
like,
Like the server closet or something?
No,
Like,
no, that's
it's
not
just
what's
the
going
number
on.
of
There
cards
are
in there,
some.
if we're doing that number of baskets, this is a really
Expensive.
extensive operation that might not be the best use of our time and resources. So like building level sounds
We're talking
great.
about 10 schools.
Okay,
You're talking about a separate technology department and a separate maintenance department. If there are separate departments in the town that wasn't on the staffing list, I copied all the staffing lists, and there's 2 central offices. I don't think that's extensive.
How will you know, Marla, around the, like, I just know there's folks that operate the server room at Essex Town, but I think they just, I don't, they've never been treated separately, so I just didn't know, but the bus barn was a separate effort that I, just like I did central office, in addition to the 3 buildings, I would make sure the bus barn got something, so I don't actually know that I could even tell you if there were separate departments or not, but that would be one of those things to be mindful of if you're doing something for departments at the high school, I guess. Then are there, if there's departments at ADL, there are probably departments at EMS. I don't really know. It just wasn't the level we got to.
Would folks feel comfortable if Kim and Marla and I talk after this meeting and try to figure this out?
sounds fantastic.
Thank you. All right, so, anything else before we move to next meeting's agenda? All right, so I know we have the regular things. I think one of the topics on our work plan is the promise of merger. That we're gonna have our first conversation around that. Is there anything that would be out of the ordinary that folks think we need to talk about?
We do have some of the work that we've begun on sort of the equity inventory, primarily looking at staffing ratios and looking at some of those numbers, which will be an early look for us working through some of the budget stuff.
So that is part of really the promise of merger.
Yeah, we've been looking at the promise of merger. What are the stories that demonstrate, what we had intended? So they're everything from
Okay.
arranging a Westford student to be able to participate in cross-country team for Essex Middle School. Those are, quote unquote, some of the promises of the merger.
Promises. Kim?
Yes, with the equity inventory, Brian, I definitely envisioned it to be more extensive than staffing numbers, and that it would identify, recognizing that not which instrument people are playing to be the question of equity, and not that this is going to be the dive to say, does this serve the same purpose but look differently? But it was truly to be sort of a superficial inventory. We've got volleyball for all kids 6th through 8th grade or whatever, like 6th through 12th grade, like something that actually acknowledged where we are seeing things that are provided across the board and things that are not available to some kids right now. And that I wasn't thinking of an equity inventory to be purely staffing ratios. I hadn't even frankly thought about staffing ratios as a matter of equity, which certainly it would be.
Right. So, what we've what we spent our time on is, in the equity is about outcomes, where the equality is sometimes about the inputs. So we've been focusing on those outcomes. Our staff provide the primary piece of difference within our delivery of our program. So it is a key point. It's not the only point, and it's not the only time we'll visit it. It's just that's what in the staff, in your retreat in the summer, we had talked about this would be the first look at the equity inventory. We have particularly been trying to stay away from what you just described in that sense of like, where do we have volleyball, where do we have fencing, where do we have arts and crafts, because those are some of the elements that we've been seeing have been, that's a game where everybody wants what everyone else has, and it's a game of just that doesn't have its findings in the outcomes. I mean, we're working many of our extracurricular and our offerings. We're trying to work into a thematic basis or a category basis, so that we don't get caught up in that. We want music exploration or music education, and it may be different and show up differently based upon the skills and talents at the local buildings, and that it doesn't have to be the same in order to be equitable.
Absolutely, but we've not even had a first blush at where some of those differences exist, and I may have some sense, and I'm sure less than a degree of detail on even what's offered in Essex Town from my years there. Martha would be pretty intimately familiar, and Andre with Westford, each of us with the experiences we've had previously. So I'm.
So our focus again, where we've looked
that-
at differences, is like we don't have a math program in the 3 schools in Essex, and there's a math program in the other 7 schools. So we've been looking at that as a primary difference that has an outcome impact to it. So again, we've been trying to stay away from the flow. What we get pretty regularly in the central office is, they have ukuleles. We want ukuleles. They have We've been actually trying to intentionally stay away from that and look more at curricular alignment, educational outcomes, staffing. We have this many paras. You don't have this many paras. In my school, I have this type of aid that's, so we've been looking at those larger pictures that have more significant outcome impacts, rather than looking, and instructional minutes. We're looking at literacy and double dosing. We're looking at where the math is, where some of the specials, because we see schools that have developed master schedules that are not doing some of our best practice on literacy and double dosing. So
Is that what you mean by staffing then?
Yes.
When we're gonna, so it's not just ratios, but like what services are being provided with the staff you're talking about? Okay. I think eventually we are, I guess at least from my standpoint, I thought at some point we were gonna acknowledge sort of where differences are. We didn't last year, and you weren't, I don't think you were with us then. I know you weren't with us then, but our budget process, we had somebody come and ask for like an ADL volleyball coach. And none of us really knew whether or not there was EMS volleyball going on. We knew there wasn't volleyball in Westford. Like we were not just even informed of some of the most basic superficial information that would identify what people, I think, thought they were talking about when they were looking to have equitable opportunities, would have discussed it probably on the more superficial level, and we just really didn't know. We had no way of knowing where we were and where we stood on superficial stuff, recognizing that's not how you design and build and invest programs, but we haven't defined what student outcomes we're looking for. We haven't had that baseline of information. But if I'm the only one who understood that to be that way, then I might be mistaken.
I've been trying to.
Yes.
This conversation for a while.
I think when we started thinking about an equity inventory, it was because of that, and also because of the issue at the beginning of the school year that dealt with a different budget matter of that students in Essex Junction have all of their school supplies provided, whereas students in the town do not, which does produce a real difference for children who are not well off, like starting school. They feel like I need to find somebody to give me a backpack, but knowing that the district is hearing this, if I also knew that the district was keeping track of it, so that like the district knows that there's not a coach in volleyball at ADL, and that the district has chosen its priorities for a reason, like Beth Todd talks about why.
Yeah.
If we say, we're not talking about backpacks and volleyball coaches this year because our focus this year is the central like instructional equity, and we'll come back to extracurriculars and like building budgets for the beginning of the year next year.
Yeah.
Like that would be one sentence. It makes me feel like I can go to people in my community and say, you know, I know that Westford only has one language, and if they want to do cross country, they have to go all the way to the town. But they're doing some other things great, and we're focusing on
Yeah.
math teachers. Like,
No, that's a good point. I think I was hoping to get there some with the idea that we're looking at district-wide priorities, educational outcomes for equity, and looking at building needs. And I think a lot of times when equity gets thrown around a lot of different ways, but it's some of those superficial things of like people look at those building needs, like my building doesn't have blank and somebody else does. And sometimes it's not even confirmed that somebody else actually has it. It just becomes sort of like the swirl. But I do appreciate you saying that. I mean, our intent is to be at a higher level, because where we start, where we push this organization in its initial trajectory, hopefully is in the more substantive kind of mission-driven parts of it. Looking at those educational outcomes. I mean, aligning our math K-5 so that our aligned math 6 through 8 can contribute to our 9-12 pursuits. That's a really big thing.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the elements that we've been focusing on. Our para numbers, when we talk about ratios and we talk about the governor and so forth, we have very different delivery models when it comes to students that are struggling. That DMG report talked about that. Those are significant elements that really do have a real equity outcome difference. I mean, in literacy and grade level attainment and that kind of stuff.
would it be possible to ask the building leaders to, like, in the process of their grade level meetings and communications, to talk about smaller matters on the equity inventory that you guys have come up with that they could really work out for themselves? Like, presumably it's principals who are controlling the area of the budget that determines whether they spend their money on buying pencils for kindergartners or not. So if the principals talk to each other, they might be able to sort some things out in the interim while the district is focused on curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, we are definitely trying to bring that team together as we talk about many things now. We're seeing that we didn't have just 2 different systems we're merging. We may in some cases had 10 different systems we were merging. And we are trying to drive towards that alignment now. Not that a one size fits all, but for our parents and our students, they do not experience things the way the adults do, in which they go to work and they begin to work in a building for a number of years. They move through the system. So when one school doesn't offer X, another school does. One school makes you fundraise for it, another school pays for it. Each building doesn't recognize the discontinuity to that, but the families all do. Mm-hmm. And being a person that's lived in both communities and had kids go through nearly every single one of the schools, you really do recognize it, and we need to assess that out. I mean, that's not a continuum. That's not the K-12 continuum. That's part of the promise. So getting more unified would be. But I can, I want to just play the nuance of staying away from the word like these differences, this inventory of sort of differences, or just an inventory of things that are occurring, trying to keep that away from the idea that it's about equity, because that's where we just keep getting pulled in a lot of different, maybe it's my facilitator training that we went through, but we want to make sure that those are 2 different sides of a coin as we look at it. Because we can be very different from one building to the next, but accomplish the same outcomes and therefore be equitable.
As long as we're intentional about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even
Okay.
put, yeah.
Are we at a place where we'll be ready for next one? Okay, So takeaways from this meeting.
Voices for education.
Yeah, the voices is the.
That's the biggie.
I think something about the transportation update, those bullet points.
I think the, sort of mapping out the initial, or at least sharing the initial budget work calendar would be good to let people know about. Basically every Tuesday in January and February.
Except for January 9th.
Not quite.
I feel like we had to add the night.
I get the night.
Can you send me that slide as well, along with the, like, 4-column budget overview?
Oh, yeah, can I share that as a Google Doc to you?
Oh yeah, the budget process.
Okay, are we good?
Yes.
Okay, then, I need a motion to move into executive session to talk about contracts and personnel evaluation.
I move
Superintendent
we
evaluation.
move into executive session at 8:45 to discuss employee negotiations, evaluation of superintendent
Yeah.
and personnel
That's
issues.
it. No, take the last one off. I was
Take the
being,
last one off.
yeah, it's just the two things. Kim, do you have that?
I'm not, I'm sure last
Oh, shit, do you, do?
Yeah, there's two.
It's two, it's contract
It's
negotiations.
employee negotiations and the formative evaluation of the superintendent.
Superintendent.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. All right. Thank you. Brian, are you coming with us for the support staff? Yeah, okay.